We're smooth 98.1 FM. Good morning and welcome to Business Express. So it's time for us to get into the conversation. Nigeria's first quarter economic growth is in focus this morning on Business Express. And we've got our guest already, well, looking dapper for a Children's Day. Well, you need to go over to our YouTube channel to get to see him. And then you might want to say, is it for business, the office, or maybe for a match pass? Well, never can tell. But hey, let's say good morning to Nathanael, Disu, Research Analyst, Afrinvest Consulting Limited. Good morning and happy Children's Day to you.
Hello, good morning, and yeah, happy Children's Day.
All right, so Nathan, let's begin from this introduction where Nigeria's economy grew by 2.98% year on year in real terms in the first 3 months of this year. Is this growth enough or not up to par? Well, these are the questions you would help us unpack this morning. But don't forget, we also would like to hear from you. Send us your thoughts as WhatsApp message onto 0809 will be where we like to read all the WhatsApp message. So, Nathan, how do you interpret the 2.98% growth in the first quarter of this year compared to 3.46% in the third quarter of last year and the 2.31% in the first quarter of last year also?
Okay, yes, thank you very much. So the much anticipated GDP numbers were released on Friday, and we saw some very interesting numbers. So like you rightly said, GDP grew by 2.98% in Q1 2024, and that's a contraction from the 3.54% as at Q4 2023. And it's important to know that it tends to be the trend that Q4 GDP always tend to perform more than Q1 GDP. So it's not much of a surprise that we are seeing. But also in 2023, we also saw that the Q1 GDP grew by 2.31% and it ended the year with 3.5. So it's more like we're likely to see that same trend, hopefully, because the year just started. So businesses are still trying to let's say, resume activities, trading, business, and the likes. But towards the end of the year, there's always that trend of increased activities. People are spending more, people are buying more. Festive seasons is going on and the like. So it's not surprising that we are seeing a bit of contraction in the GDP growth. But also compared to this time last year, we've seen a growth. So last year's Q1 GDP was 2.3%, and this year is 2.98%. And it's also interesting that last year was the transition year into a new government. So this is like the first GDP numbers of the Tinubu administration full year. And also the GDP growth for this quarter, part of the major contributor of that growth is the services sector. And in the services sector, the subsector, that's the financial sector, contributed more to that growth. And we've seen a correlation between that and also the Q1 numbers from major financial institutions, banks, and the likes. We saw how they recorded massive profits, massive numbers, PAT numbers, PBT numbers. So it's not surprising that that sector or that subsector is one of the major contributors for the GDP growth of this quarter.
Since you've touched on the good boys of the Nigerian economic sector, that you talked about services and banking, let's touch on those who seem not to be yielding to the Midas touch of the economic minders right now. Let's go to agriculture, manufacturing. They seem not to be getting to their full potentials. What's really holding them back?
So yes, the manufacturing and the agricultural sector seems to be the kind of having challenges at the moment. And we've even if we look at the stock market as at last year, we saw um quite the same interpretation last year when the banks were kind of when their share price were rallying due to the policies, forex policies, and the likes. The consumer goods, the manufacturing tends to kind of have a lot of challenges. One is because of the cost of manufacturing, cost of production in Nigeria is still high. Businesses are dealing with power issues. Businesses are dealing with high cost of energy, and also the foreign exchange volatility is also having an impact on businesses. And in the last year, though, we've seen some international, some multinationals per se leaving the country, and so the manufacturing sector of the Nigerian economy is having a whole lot of challenges, and that's why we're seeing that it's the contribution to the GDP growth is quite low compared to other sectors. And the agriculture, we know what's happening in that space. Prices of food are still high. The farmers are having challenges with their farms, insecurity issues. So these, let's say, structural challenges are what is affecting those sectors at the moment.
So why is Nigeria's economy not creating enough jobs for the population? We see opportunities, but why is no one lashing onto these opportunities?
Okay, in terms of job creation in the Nigerian economy, it's a kind of, let's say, continuous conversation. You cannot have enough of that kind of conversation. People would always have that conversation that we have over 200 million Nigerians at the moment. Why are there no jobs? So there are different angles to this conversation. The issue of job creation can come at it from different angles. You can come at it from the government angle in terms of what the government are doing, the trust factor also, because it's one thing for the government to be actively um, making moves to ensure that jobs are being created, and it's also another thing for there to be that trust or that confidence from the citizens to the government that yes, the government is actually doing a whole lot of things. We've seen what has happened in the last couple of weeks concerning the Lagos Calabar road construction and how that has affected a particular business, and jobs are being affected. So there's a whole lot of conversation in terms of job creation. There's still a lot more that the government needs to do to bridge that gap.
This takes us to oil now. That's the major sustainer of the Nigeria economy. Oil production was at 1.22 million barrels when President Bola Tinubu was sworn in on May 29, 2023. It is now about 1.57 million barrels. Is that a worthwhile improvement, you might want to say?
Okay, yes, compared to when this new administration came into power and compared to what the crude oil production numbers are, it's a good improvement, if I'm to use that word, because yes, when we see some slight improvement in what is happening in the economy, we should applaud that. But we could also note that based on the federal government's budget benchmark of crude oil production 1.7, 1.8. So at current levels of 1.5, there's still a little bit of gap. So there's still much more that the government needs to do, because like you rightly said, crude oil production is a major source of forex. And even in the previous times I've been on the show talking about the FX challenges, there's a monetary policy aspect and there's a fiscal policy aspect. So it's nice that we're seeing some slight improvements in the fiscal policy aspect. So what the CBN is doing, if it is now matching up with what the fiscal side is doing, we are going to see improvements in the FX exchange rate, and that will be good for Nigeria. Because also, like I rightly said earlier on, FX volatility is one of the challenges the manufacturing sector is having. So since if we're seeing improvement in the crude oil production numbers, it would likely translate to appreciation of the naira, and that will bode well for the manufacturing sector and also the economy at large.
So briefly, what can we do to now improve on our OPEC quota from what we see, that we don't go below this 1.57 million barrels now?
Okay, yes, thank you very much. So that's something that is really interesting, because consistency is the most important thing that we should be looking forward at this moment. We saw what happened last month when the CBN policies led to the appreciation of the naira, but that has already lost steam, and naira is now back to 1,500. So it's really important that we don't go below these production numbers, because if we go below these production numbers, first off, it will affect our budget benchmark, and also it would also affect our forex inflows, and we are likely to see more depreciation of the currency. So much work needs to be done in the oil theft aspect. Curbing oil theft is one of the most important things that the government needs to do. So it's important that we don't go below this benchmark, because we are still far away from our highest point, I think about 2 point something million barrels per day. So we're still way, way, way far compared to what we can produce. So we've seen what we can produce in the past and what we are producing now. So there's still much more potential for that.
Now, as we begin to wind down the conversation this morning, I see messages coming in already, but we'll get to that shortly. Let's see what this conversation would look like if we don't touch on power. So, how much is the lack of power hampering Nigeria's economy, and what is key to fixing power in the country? That is electricity.
Yes, power is one of the most important things we can't help but talk about. It affects both the residential individuals, and it also affects corporates, because rising energy costs in corporates would likely translate to increase in price of goods, because these corporations would most likely pass on the higher energy costs to the consumers. And since salaries are not increasing, if I use the word, and also so many challenges in terms of the income, so it will affect that. And just last month, I think, yes, last month, we saw that the federal government through the to the NESI moved subsidy in the electricity, and the band A customers, their tariff was hiked to about 225 kilowatts per hour. So now there's increased cost in terms of electricity and fuel. Also, we've seen how that has we had experience of scarcity like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and that also led to rise in price of diesel, price of fuel, and like so. Higher energy cost is something that a lot of people battle with, both individuals, both corporate. So that would have an impact in production, like earlier on talked about, and that's also why we're seeing that's why we saw the manufacturing sector have little contribution to the GDP growth.
If you can do this for me in about with a sentence, much as you look so academic right now, like a professor going in for one of those presentation, but let's quickly get this. Is the Japa syndrome still something to worry about in Nigeria's economy, briefly?
Okay, so another interesting conversation that we've been having, Japa syndrome, brain drain, and the like. So now, even if we look at it now that the exchange rate is not friendly, if I want to use that word, it's even more expensive for people to even relocate. It's even more expensive for people to even relocate. And we can't blame anybody for choosing to relocate. People have different reasons why they want to relocate. Some are relocating due to the fact of would I say, bigger promise of economic prosperity in other nations, some because of the security challenge, and some because they just want a better life for themselves. But we can't, would I say, we can't stop that. If I want to use that word, people would always have different reasons for wanting to relocate. So it's more important. And that's why earlier on I talked about that trust between the government and the citizen. If that can be strengthened, we can see what's happening in a particular southeastern state, how the governor is doing things that the citizens have not seen in a while. So when there's that trust between the government and the citizens, even those that have relocated may want to start coming back. They may not come back fully, permanently, but they may want to start, and that would also translate to higher remittance in FX. So there's a whole lot. We can't stop the Japa syndrome, but what the government needs to do is to ensure that there's that trust between the government, what the government is doing, and the citizens.
All right, looks like a very fine place to leave this conversation, but let's see what we can do with the messages. I've got Fine Oluboroko's message waiting already, and he says, well, the signs that an economy is doing, okay, that's the sign is that an economy is doing well is when manufacturing and agri sector are doing well. However, an economy where it is only the banking sector that is doing well means that the economy is in real bad shape. Fine Oluboroko's thoughts this morning. Now, final message from Gilbert Musa from Festac says, on the deep in job creation in Nigeria, this can be traced back to 1988 when inflation was obvious in the Nigerian economy. We can take a cue from the Yakubu Gowon's era from 1967 to 1975. The good old days of we've got so much money, but we think about what do we do with it? But anyway, it goes on. When he embarked on massive construction and creation of automobile assembly plants in Nigeria, that's where we can leave the messages this morning on Business Express. But we will say thank you to our guest this morning, Nathan Disu, research analyst, Afrinvest Consults Limited, for your time. Have yourself a great Children's Day. Ice cream?
You too. Thank you very much for having me.
Bye bye.
Yeah, bye.